Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Advocate Live. Today is December 17th, 2020, and tonight we are going to talk about all things IEPs. We'll hear what's on the minds of parents who are struggling to know if their child's IEP is right for them and what they can do if they disagree with their child's IEP. We're also going to be discussing the alarming report that came out earlier this week regarding special education system here in Virginia. We're here with our expert educational advocate, Lorraine Hightower. Lorraine specializes in advocating for students with dyslexia through her practice in Lansdowne, Virginia. Lorraine's not only a trained mediator and a certified advocate, but she's also a mom of a child with severe dyslexia. So her personal experience has inspired her to help others navigate the special education system. I'm Melissa Minnick, and I will be your moderator for tonight, asking Lorraine your questions. So while we're live, we encourage you to ask your questions in the comments. And as a matter of fact, just let us know if you're here right now. We would love to hear from you, where you're from, and of course use that comment box to ask questions and to comment throughout tonight's event. We want this to be as interactive an event as possible. Let's see. So I will go ahead and start off reading the questions that were sent to us ahead of time, because some people like to be kept anonymous for these kinds of questions, so they send us questions ahead of time. So we'll go ahead and cover some of those to begin with. As we go live, feel free to just slide your questions in there, and we'll stop and we'll answer those as you bring them in. Okay. Now, Lorraine, our first question comes from a parent who read a report that came out earlier this week. It was a report given by the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission that outlines some serious shortcomings in the way the Virginia Department of Education handles special education. So here's the question. It says, sure. After reading the JLARC report and seeing that very few complaints against schools were resolved and very few students were offered compensatory services, do you think our kids will be able to get compensatory services for the COVID-19 shutdown? Do you think there will be changes made now that the VDOE has been called out for this? Could you speak a little bit about the report for anybody who hasn't seen it and maybe tackle this question for us?
Sure, I would be happy to, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We know December is a busy month for many families, so we appreciate those of you who are taking the time to participate in this really important discussion. Yes, Melissa, the JLARC report, the findings, the recommendations are getting a lot of attention right now. For those of you who are not familiar, JLARC is a kind of a policy and review and regulatory arm of the General Assembly. And they did look into many issues that special education families have been concerned about and advocating for and trying to make a difference in. So I appreciate the question on compensatory education, because that has been a longstanding concern as it relates to students with disabilities whose school team was not in compliance with their IEP. So if we had a student who was supposed to be receiving certain services and the school division was not providing those services, and the VDOE was aware of this situation through a state complaint, they were not necessarily requiring corrective action in the form of compensatory educational services. And that has been quite alarming to many families. In that situation, most often, the VDOE, the Virginia Department of Education, would simply instruct the school division to reconvene the IEP team, which left the parents with very few dispute resolution options. They only had the choice of, filing a state complaint again, which they'd already done, requesting mediation, or pursuing formal due process. So it is, I think, great that attention is now on compensatory education when school divisions are not in compliance with IEPs. Those children should be receiving those services. And I do want to just speak a little bit, Melissa, about COVID-19 recovery services, because I know through some of our social media posts, some of my phone calls with prospective clients and parents, there's a lot of confusion around COVID-19 recovery services versus compensatory services. Right. So the JLARC report, as I just shared with everyone had more to do with when school districts were not providing services potentially causing harm to students. A remedy was for the VDOE to direct the school division to provide compensatory education services. Now with COVID-19, this is not a harm situation. This is the child was denied special education services outlined in their IEP because the governor shut down school in Virginia. I think it was as of March 13th, and they were denied access to special education services, and that potentially, didn't allow them to make meaningful progress towards their goals. They might have regressed in some of these areas of need. So that is a different conversation than compensatory education as it pertains to lack of compliance for services in the IEP.
Okay.
Is that
I think so. So that lack of compliance is the difference between compensatory services and COVID-19 recovery services.
Yes. Okay. And so compensatory education services are, you can think of it as they're often a remedy when harm has been done to a student. And then comparatively, COVID-19 recovery is not a harm situation. It simply is the student with the IEP couldn't get their services. Now they've either regressed or they're not making meaningful progress. And the IEP team has determined that they need some recovery services because of the pandemic to help close that gap. And the IEP team can make these decisions.
Okay, gotcha. So you don't have to file a state complaint in order to get the COVID-19 recovery services.
That's exactly right. Yes. So
gotcha.
The JLARC report is really not about COVID-19, I guess is what I'm trying to emphasize. It's really about students with IEPs not getting services, parents filing state complaint and saying this is happening, I believe my district's out of compliance, and then the VDOE didn't issue corrective action.
Got you. And I saw that the Virginia Department of Education put out a press release, and specifically regarding the question about investigation of complaints, they said that they are going to have a new approach to supporting students with disabilities. And it says that at the beginning of next year, there will be expanded criteria for the investigation of complaints and a new procedure for confirming the implementation of required corrective actions.
And to that point, Melissa, I was just going to say, I think I didn't answer the second part of the person's question where they said, do we think children will start to get compensatory services? And I would say I am very hopeful that that will happen. One, because, Superintendent Lane has made a public commitment to do so, to look at services, compliance, decision-making around non-compliance differently, but also, this is now a General Assembly issue because the General Assembly asked JLARC to do this investigative work, and now many members of the legislature are aware of these issues. And I don't think they're just going to simply go away. I think they're going to get the attention that they deserve, and hopefully, not to overuse the phrase, the corrective action that's needed at the VDOE level, as well as for some of these kids who have challenges with their IEP services.
Right. And as we talk about this report, it's important to know that this aspect of it, talking about the compensatory services and they're looking into complaints, is only one very small part of that report. Are there any other parts that you think are really important for families to know about, Lorraine?
I do, Melissa. I just want to say, in general, one of the most disturbing statistics that came out of that report for me was the 30-point gap that exists, the graduation point gap that exists for students with disabilities as compared to students who do not have disabilities. So a 30-point difference. I think students with disabilities were graduating, I want to say it was something around I don't know if I have it here, about 60%. And then students, who don't have disabilities were closer to 90% or 91%. And, that's a devastating statistic. We also found, as many, I know in Northern Virginia, many parents have been very frustrated with their students' transition services as part of their IEP. And, one of the recommendations that JLARC made is that we need robust transition services for students with disabilities when they get out of high school. And for a lot of the dyslexic students that I work with, and we're a part of transition discussions, oftentimes the school team just wants to have, a quick interview with a student and not really talk about all the different factors in the IEP as they pertain to transition that should be taking place. There's Another alarming statistic that was in the JLARC report was that almost half of the IEPs did not have appropriate academic or functional goals. So, I mean, that's tremendously alarming to me, Melissa, to think that almost half of the kids with IEPs across the state of Virginia do not have effective goals, which most likely then means they're not getting appropriate services, which means they're not closing their gap. And another disturbing fact that came out from JLARC is that the monitoring of the state Virginia Department of Education is too lax. It's not, they're not responsive enough. They're not watching how special education students are being educated, the compliance issues. They're kind of, just letting this
on self-reporting.
What was that?
They're relying on the districts doing self-reporting.
Yeah, and that's not to say that all school districts, are at fault here, but I think it was 48% are not able to put effective goals in place in their IEPs. And
on a part that really struck me as a teacher when they were talking about how little training our general education teachers and our administrators have in special education, and I can say personally that I can attest to that.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You and I have had many discussions where you were a teacher and never felt that you were taught appropriately how to teach reading, and that you would even tell your administration, I can't teach reading. Unfortunately, this is true in most of the IEP meetings that I'm in with parents, and we start asking about teacher qualifications because we have maybe a severely dyslexic student and we want to know what is the structured literacy or specialized reading program that the school division is offering. I will often ask about teacher training. And more times than not, the response is, well, Mrs. Hightower, this special education teacher is licensed to teach in Virginia, and therefore they meet the criteria. And I would propose that yes, we appreciate their licensure requirement, but if they're using a methodology that is specialized, even the International Dyslexia Association puts an hour requirement, around 60 hours of experience in a certain methodology to be an effective teacher in that subject matter. So it can be very concerning about teacher preparedness, for our reading specialists as they leave college and end up in the schools. And even general education teachers. JLARC commented on general education teachers are often not really aware of what students with disabilities require or how maybe they need to differentiate their instruction to everyone in their classroom.
Yeah.
So, I think, didn't we share the JLARC report on one of our Facebook?
I did. I was just going to say, if you out there have not yet had a chance to read this report, I encourage you to look back at our Facebook page and scroll down, because we just shared it the other day. And Lorraine has a call to action there for parents. If you would like to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I was just going to say, if you're not aware of the report, absolutely take a look at it. I think parents, if you do have a child with an IEP or even students with disabilities, it will be very enlightening to you. You'll probably feel somewhat validated that these concerns have now been identified and that recommendations are being issued. But we cannot stop there. I always say it's really critical that parents take the time to tell their family's story, tell your child's story to your school board member, to your legislator, because the only way I have seen systemic change locally and statewide and even nationally is by parents and kids having the courage to say, this issue is important to my family. This is how it affected me. Here's what I'm asking you as my, legislator, elected official to do to resolve this issue so it doesn't happen to other children and their family in my district or across our state. So yes, please do. It doesn't take that long. And I think we made sure to include how to locate your legislator. School board members are usually on school district web pages. You can find your school board. You can find how to contact them. It is really important that we all just take 15 minutes to make that announcement about how our kids with disabilities are being served and what we think should be done differently.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. That's right. Here's our next question.
Sure.
This one is, my daughter's IEP is threadbare. There is nothing to it anymore. I don't think she tested out of anything, but there are barely any services or help from teachers in it anymore. She needs more help in DL, not less. So it sounds like this is a change in the IEP since distance learning has started. She doesn't give us any more information about that but that's kind of the idea that I'm getting.
Okay, well, what concerns me is when that parent is saying the IEP is threadbare, meaning it sounds like it doesn't have appropriate goals, probably not services, maybe even not accommodations or assistive technology in that IEP if it truly is threadbare or minimal. And if the parent, I kind of am getting from that tone, I'm going to assume the parent, is obviously saying, I want more, definitely during distance learning, but maybe even in-person learning. So I would, again, I always say, I know parents don't really like hearing this, but these decisions are made at the IEP team table, even the virtual table. So I would request and recommend that parent reach out and reconvene her child's IEP team. At that, if they said, why are we reconvening the IEP team? I would say I would like to discuss and hear from the school team about my daughter's present levels. And what I mean by that is, all services, all goals and services start with present levels. So the school team, should come together, should be able to provide that parent with, at this time of year, we have some benchmark assessments that have been given to students as we reassess them. They should be able to go through the IEP, any areas of identified needs, and here's where your daughter is performing now, here's where she was last year at this time. And if that's not possible, then that parent could consider, where is her daughter in the reevaluation process? Maybe it's time to request the reevaluation if that's an option, so you can get really good diagnostic data on present levels. And if your daughter has recently been evaluated and that's not an option, again, I would be asking the IEP team to even conduct some informal, what do I want to call them, progress monitoring probes that can be given to determine what is her present level. If I'm just going to, again, assume that this is a student with dyslexia, and do we have a present, fluency measurement? Can we look at comprehension? Can we look at decoding? Can we look at phonemic awareness? Whatever it is that parent's concerned about, let's get some baseline data. What are her present levels? And then let's use that data to inform what goals and services, assistive technology, and accommodations for that child. What does she need, and what should be in that IEP?
That sounds like great questions to open up conversation, because she says in her question, I don't think she tested out of anything, which makes me wonder about the communication going on between the team and the parents there. So that's a great way to open up communication again with the team.
Yeah, and to that point, Melissa, I just want to add, students don't test out of IEPs. So especially in Virginia, the IEP really is in existence until the parent gives consent to remove services. So I know there is sometimes confusion around, parents are hesitant to do reevaluations because they're concerned that services might be taken away if the student tests too high, scores too high, no longer shows need. But Virginia parents do not need to be concerned with that as part of the reevaluation, because Virginia is one of the states that is a consent state. So parents actually have to give consent for services to be removed. And I say, that you definitely want to get present data. You don't want to rely on data from 3 years ago to inform IEP decision-making, whether it's goals, services, or accommodations.
Well, Lorraine, if she already signed an IEP that has this reduction of services, and now her child's getting less services, can she go back and say, oops, I made a mistake?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a parent at any point in the school year can certainly request an IEP team meeting, and if a parent has given consent, they can revoke consent. They can modify consent. But again, I would say, well, why are you wanting to do that, right? Why are you wanting to change your consent? And chances are it's because that parent isn't happy with what's happening for their child in terms of school service hours or goals, or maybe placement even. So to me, you're going to want to, before you change your consent, you're going to bring your team back together, share your areas of concern, look at current present level data to inform decision making, and see if you can get the school team to put an IEP together that's not threadbare, that is actually individualized and appropriate for your child.
Yep. And, talking about consent leads right to the next question that we had. And I think parents often have questions about consent. This one says, I already signed the IEP at the beginning of the school year. Can I go back and sign it with partial consent now? So can you talk a little bit about partial consent and why it's so important for parents to be signing with partial consent during this time, especially?
Sure. So that parent is saying they signed the IEP, they want to go back and sign with partial consent. That's kind of what I was just talking about a little bit. I just want to make sure I answer that parent's question, that if you are now considering partial consent, I would say to you, well, why? Why do you want partial consent when you originally signed in full consent? Something must have changed. And before I would modify my consent, I would bring the team back together and I would verbally, as well as in writing and a follow-up letter, communicate my concerns and give the IEP team the chance to address those concerns before I changed my consent. At the same time, to your question, Melissa, about why would parents want to consider signing in partial consent, many parents don't even know that they have that option, right? Ironically, on the IEP consent page for parents, there's usually only 2 signature lines. There's I agree with the IEP and I give consent, and then there's I do not agree with the IEP and I give consent. But it absolutely is a parent's right to sign in partial consent. Of course, if it's a student's, initial IEP and you want the school district to implement it so that your child can get, the all of the accommodations, maybe you want them to work on some of the goals, but not all the goals. Maybe you like some of the services, but you're not in agreement that all of the services are appropriate. You can actually give consent to implement the IEP, but by signing in partial agreement, you're saying that, my partial agreement, while I'm giving consent to implement the IEP, at the same time, I do not agree that the proposed IEP provides a free and appropriate public education for my child, and here's why. And then you would want to outline those areas that you're not in agreement. So once the IEP team knows that you're signing in partial consent, then it's up to the IEP team. Do they want to, circle back, have another discussion, see if they can get your full consent, or are they just going to say, well, we're going to have to, respectfully agree to disagree here, and we accept your partial consent, and we will implement those areas you gave consent for, and we will not implement the areas of the IEP that you did not give consent for.
Okay. I've seen a lot of parents concerned about some language in IEPs since distance learning started. Things that are alluding to the fact that they are waiving their right to compensatory services, or would it be the COVID-19 recovery services?
Yes, it could be.
Yeah, and can you go back and if you've already signed that, can you go back and sign with partial consent saying, implement all the services, but I don't agree to that language at this point?
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, in Virginia, parents have a lot of wonderful procedural safeguards that maybe other parents in other states don't have, because we are a consent state. So yes, of course, I would say, sure, if parents signed language that they now wish they hadn't, they can modify their consent. And then again, I would detail why you're modifying your consent, what you're in agreement with, what you're not in agreement with. And more often than not, you're going to need to have a conversation with the IEP team to see if you can work through those areas of disagreement.
Gotcha. Here's another question. It says, I am having trouble getting the team to do what was discussed in meetings and come back to the table prepared to discuss results and goals. How do I manage this process better?
So that sounds like a parent who's in an IEP meeting. Everything sounds like it's all going to go the way the parent is requesting, and then the follow through is not there. Is that right, Melissa?
It sounds like to me.
Okay.
They're not getting, the team isn't doing what was discussed, and they're not coming back to the table ready to discuss results and goals.
Okay, so a couple of things could be happening there. And some of the strategies that I share with parents, first and foremost, I do recommend that all parents audio record their child's IEP. I think it is asking a lot of a parent to listen to, look at data, hear the whole team, and be able to respond and make informed decisions in the moment of. So I do think getting an audio recording so that you can process it later and re-listen to it if you need to better understand what the team was saying, what their intentions were, is very helpful for parents. And it also is documenting anything that was agreed to in the meeting. So, you would have some type of reference point to say, hey, we discussed on this date, we discussed this action that I requested and the team agreed, and I'm following up to find out why that hasn't happened. But another strategy that I would definitely recommend for parents in IEP meetings as you're going through decision making, I would say, kind of who, what, when, who's going to take ownership of that? When can we expect it to be done? And, of course, we don't want to be, too directive with our school teams, but it's reasonable to say, well, what is the timeline for that? How long would you need to implement that? Can you give me a rough estimate for when we might expect that data? So, as you're participating in your child's IEP meetings, go ahead and ask, who will be taking care of that? When do you anticipate that would be done? Is it okay if I follow up with you in 2 weeks? So that you're really, as a parent, understanding what is going to be done, who's going to do it, and you have some recourse for follow-up. And I do also recommend sometimes with certain school teams, it's a helpful strategy to send a thank you letter after the IEP meeting that outlines your understanding, what you believe the school team is going to be doing on behalf of your child and their IEP. And then putting in there, if my understanding is not accurate, please let me know as soon as possible. And that way you're also kind of, providing a written understanding of what you believe is to take place as part of the IEP team decision making. And if there is any misunderstanding, it gives the school team the chance to circle back and let you know, oh, we didn't intend that, or here's what we meant. And then the parent can decide if they're okay with that decision or if they want to reconvene the IEP team to discuss it further.
Those are great.
I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
That's great. Very excellent ideas. We have another question that goes back to signing partial agreement again. So how do you sign a partial agreement? Do you type a letter and then sign it at the bottom, or do you have to sign the signature page that is part of the IEP?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because right now we're in, everyone's virtual. We're having virtual IEP discussions, and a lot of school teams are sending digital IEPs in Adobe or different platforms. And so parents are feeling like they can't modify or sign in partial consent because they're getting these electronic signature pages. So I would highly recommend that parents print the electronic document, and then they're going to want to indicate on the parent consent page that where it says I agree, I just say modify that. Just write on there, I partially agree. And then put that, why you're partially agreeing. School teams are very much going to want parents to outline, these are the areas I'm in agreement, these are the areas that I'm in disagreement. So, sign on the signature page that I'm in partial agreement, and then you can always provide a separate document that outlines the areas of disagreement.
Great, thank you.
Scan and send all that back or mail it back to the school division, because these electronic signature documents are definitely causing, I know, a lot of parents a lot of stress. So that is one suggestion for how you can kind of navigate around that.
Yes, great. Thank you, Lorraine. That's great advice. Let's see. My child is reading 2 years behind grade level. She has really bad spelling and hates writing. The goal on her IEP is to edit her writing. How could that be accomplished in a year if they don't even know how to read yet? What are some better goals for a child reading 2 years below grade level?
Okay, that felt like a lot of questions in one, Melissa. So,
yeah,
and I'm happy to answer them. Of course, that's why we do this. And thank you for those of you that are joining us live. Just give me those questions one at a time so I can respond.
Okay. Absolutely. So the background is the child is reading 2 years behind, below grade level.
Okay.
And she's really bad spelling, hates writing, probably part of our dyslexia community here, reaching out to us. And she says that the goal on the IEP is for her to edit her writing, right? And she says, how can that be accomplished in a year if they don't know how to read yet? So how can she be editing if she can't read?
So can we pause right there? I mean, because I was in an IEP meeting today, ironically, that it is for a student with severe writing deficits and spelling deficits. And that was what the IEP team proposed, was an editing goal. And I actually said, well, how can we expect, the student to edit her misspellings or to catch them with her eyes when she actually can't even spell at grade level? She's many years behind. So, first, I would say that doesn't sound, an editing goal does not sound like an appropriate goal for a student who's not able to read and write and maybe has a 2-year achievement gap in those areas. I do think On the reading side, again, we don't have the student's specific data, but we would look at where her challenge is. Obviously she's probably going to need, a decoding goal at a minimum, because there's a phonological component that's probably not at grade level. She might even, though, if it runs even deeper than that, she might need a phonemic awareness goal, which really starts breaking down, the sounds, letter sounds into little minute parts and being able to add and delete them and blend them. She's probably going to need a fluency goal, may need comprehension, may need a sight word goal. Some of these high frequency sight words are not decodable. So there are often, in a structured literacy program, there are, red words or trick words that align with what syllable type the student is learning. And those can be taught in parallel to, the decoding syllables that the student is working on. So there's a variety of reading goals that might need to come into play. And then on the spelling side, definitely we would want the team to have an encoding goal or a spelling goal, because I think, we say this all the time, the way the letters sound is phonological processing, right? But the way the letters look on paper is the orthographic mapping of that sound syllable association. So it's a very different skill than being able to, read and write. These are two different processing. And again, I have to just say, I'm not a clinical psychologist or a neuropsych, but this is often what we see with students with dyslexia. So to improve writing, and well, I'm going to talk about writing in just a second, because I feel pretty strongly about that. But to improve spelling, it's the same methodology, right? It's structured literacy. You're teaching it in a cumulative to sequential, multisensory way that is prescriptive, that allows for mastery at every level. So they're learning how to read and write simultaneously. But in general, we do a pretty poor job of teaching writing to students with dyslexia and students with disabilities, I'll say. But oftentimes what I see is that, school teams will just propose an editing goal. And to me, writing is really a three-part process. There's like the pre-planning and, what am I going to write? Then there's the actual writing, the written composition piece. Do I have an introductory paragraph? Do I have my main idea, my supporting sentences, or paragraphs to support my, my thesis statement? And then do I have a concluding paragraph? And oftentimes we kind of skip the actual writing and we just worry about the editing. But to me, for kids with dyslexia, editing is the last part of the equation. It's really about planning and pre-writing strategies and then actually getting the writing out. And oftentimes our kids with dyslexia need to use speech to text. They need to use spell check software. They need to use editing software. So teaching, writing might be different for kids with dyslexia. And many of them are very bright. They're very creative. They have great ideas. They want to write about them. But let's just say they have, dysgraphia, which often does co-occur, in some kids with dyslexia. Writing with paper, pen may not come as easily to them as speech to text. Mm-hmm. So then we start talking about, what do they need to get their writing out? Maybe they use graphic organizers, speech to text, editing software. So I didn't mean to go, too far down the rabbit hole on that one, but I see that so often, and it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating to see a child who cannot write, let's say, a sentence, and we're going to just have them edit their work. They really need to be taught what is a well-written paragraph look like, and then how do we build from there?
Right, absolutely. And do you have any resources or ideas for parents who aren't sure about how students learn to read or learn to write and know that the goal's not right? Like, this parent knew that editing wasn't the right goal. But other than, the great ideas that you just shared there, how can they learn more about what should be a good goal? Do you have any ideas or resources?
I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, but I feel like we've done some blogs that talk specifically about identifying your child's unique needs. I know we've done a template on goal writing, effective goal writing. I don't know if that was just for our clients or if that's available to all parents.
That was available to clients specifically. If you feel like this is a place of need for you and you want to reach out to us, we'll be happy to send you that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that as well. Rather than give like a blanket recommendation on that, I would much rather parents reach out to us, schedule a discovery session. I dedicate so much time each week to answering parents' questions specifically about their family, their situation, offering, some quick advice, however I can be helpful. So I'm happy to do that in that situation, and then give more kind of targeted recommendations.
Sounds good. That sounds good. All right. Well, if you have any last minute questions, everybody out there, go ahead and throw them into the comment box. But if we don't see any pop up, then we are going to finish up for today, and then we can, I do see a question popping up. Here we go. How do you see evaluations moving forward with everything being distance learning and virtual? Now she gives a little background. My daughter was evaluated by a private neuropsychologist, and the scores are lower than the ones given by the school. I know our IEP needs to be changed, but I think the school will want to do their own evaluation. I want to know we are doing everything we can to change her services and not lose any more due to COVID. Mm-hmm. So let me read a little more. You want me to go back and do it again?
Okay, sounds good.
So the question is, how do you see evaluations moving forward with everything being distance learning and virtual? My daughter was evaluated by a private neuropsych, and the scores are lower than the ones given by the school. I know our IEP needs to be changed, but I think the school will want to do their own evaluation. I want to know we are doing everything we can to change her services and not lose any more time due to COVID.
Okay, so evaluations are taking place right now in school districts, at least all of the school divisions that I'm advocating in. We are using, the school teams are using safety equipment, mitigating measures. The evaluator is definitely saying if they believe this is an accurate assessment of the child because, they might have been wearing a face shield or sitting, a certain distance apart. But evaluations, even though we are still in the middle of a pandemic and everything is virtual, those evaluations, when necessary, they're taking place virtually for sure, and they are also taking place in person with safety mitigating measures. So I just want to say I do see evaluations continuing to take place, both privately and in school. And then that parent was talking about the private evaluator scores were less than the school teams. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like she's concerned that the school team won't see the area of need as much as what the private evaluator is recommending. And of course, if she's comfortable, if that parent is comfortable sharing that private evaluation with the school team, they're not required to adopt all of the recommendations from the private evaluation, but they're absolutely required to consider the findings of a private evaluation. And, again, I always, and it doesn't happen that often that you'll see a big discrepancy between a school's data and a private evaluator's data. But when it does, I highly recommend that parents advocate for additional data. So you can actually kind of, to use the phrase, triangulate your data and look for something that's either going to corroborate more with the private evaluator or the school. So in that case, if I was that mom, I'd be looking at what are my child's areas of need. Okay, the private evaluation says this, but the school, shows it a little bit better. Let's just use decoding, for example. Maybe the private evaluator says the child is decoding at this level, and the school team's like, no, we actually think they're making a lot more progress in decoding at this level. There's a lot of informal, quick assessments that can be done. For example, a lot of school districts like the core phonics survey. That's very easy to administer, and it's a quick, it goes over all the different syllable types, but it gives you kind of an at a glance of where the child is in terms of the syllable types, their reading and decoding ability. So that would introduce another data measure into the conversation. And what does that show? We've talked a lot, Melissa, about you really do need to use the data when you're advocating. And if you don't have the data, request the data. So again, I hope that if this parent is live, you can ask a follow-up question if I'm not giving you enough, recommendations to act on. But I think that where there is a discrepancy and you feel in your gut, because I do believe strongly in mother's gut instinct that something isn't quite right, ask the school team to do some additional assessments in that area of concern. And, if you get one or two additional measures that show, no, it's not really a concern, that would be pretty reassuring to me. You might take that data, follow up with your private evaluator and say, hey, look at this. I asked the school team to do additional assessments, and then maybe the private evaluator can weigh in on, yeah, it does look like it's better across the board. Or conversely, the private evaluator might say, well, that's because they didn't give this version, or that's because they didn't do it in a timed environment. And I stand by my report, and it's still a concern. And you should go back to your school team and ask them to do a timed assessment of decoding or fluency. So again, this is not a one and done type of situation. When we have students with IEPs, as parents, we should always be looking at, whatever data we have, beginning of the year, quarterly, any assessments that come home, and making sure that our IEP always reflects present levels, areas of need, and know that it's a fluid document. You can change it. You can reconvene. This is another need that we need to add to the IEP. It wasn't a need before when we weren't in distance learning, but now I'm seeing that with my child in distance learning, we have all kinds of executive function concerns, or we have attention concerns. So I know we've talked about this at past Ask the Advocates and in our blog. I just want parents to feel empowered to ask the questions, ask for assessments, ask for consideration of the private data. So I hope that was helpful.
Yep, that sounds good to me. I do have another question. If this woman were to get her private evaluation prior to her school evaluation, let's say that she had that originally, then she gets her school evaluation and it doesn't quite match up. Is it possible for her to get an independent educational evaluation by the school system to get another set of data to look at?
You could, but that would really, I wouldn't recommend that, Melissa. That feels like a lot of over testing of that student. And also, there's also a concern that there can be kind of a practice effect on some of these assessments. Evaluators often do want to know, what is the child, when were they last evaluated, and what assessments were given, because they already, right out of the gate, have to consider, can I give that assessment? Do I need to give a different version? Should I give a different type of orthographic processing assessment because the school team gave this type? So, I would be hesitant to put a child through 3 comprehensive evaluations in a short period of time. I would rather drill in on where is the area of dispute, I'm going to call it. Where are we not in agreement? Because often these assessments, you'll have highs and lows, and then you'll have those that are kind of close, where, the school team isn't in full agreement with the private evaluator, and the private evaluator saying, well, I look at this through a different lens, and I think it is an area of need that the school team should address. So in those situations is where I would ask the school team to dig a little bit deeper. If they're not in agreement, let's give some additional assessments. Let's look further, because, meaning we, the private evaluator, and I, the parent, we think it is an area of concern.
Right. So not necessarily more testing, but more specific testing, targeted testing.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Great. Thank you, Lorraine.
Yeah.
There's another question here. It says, what do you do if you don't feel your child is ready for transition? My ECSE child is supposed to transition to kindergarten next year, but myself and her doctors don't feel she's ready.
Well, again, I think that parent should discuss that with the IEP team. And, placement is a page in the IEP. I know we're talking whether it's private school, general education, day school, what have you, but I always say placement extends beyond the actual type of school. I mean, to me, placement could be classroom, whether it's self-contained or general education or team taught. And 100%, if that parent does not feel that her child is ready to move on and transition to a different grade, I would say that. And I would probably not, I would ask, what are my options? As a parent, I don't believe that my child's ready. I don't want to, give consent to this. How do we work through this? What other options can we consider? What else does the school team need to look at in order to make a more informed choice about that child? Because the other thing that I'm seeing, Melissa, in the virtual setting, it's really hard, for school teams to know how children are doing right now, because they're seeing like a 1-inch by 2-inch picture of your child. And in some classrooms, they don't even get to see all the kids all at the same time. So parent data and parent input is more critical now than it ever has been. And in that case, if I were that parent, I would be saying, I see my child. I have my eyes on my child, 24/7. Maybe that child's in a hybrid program and they do get to go to school a little bit at a time. But chances are that parent knows her child, what that child cannot do. And I would also look at what are the expectations for the next grade level. And I would speak to those. My child's not ready for that, and here's why I believe so. And here's why, I disagree with putting her at that grade level. Here's what I think she needs, and working through that with the IEP team.
Okay, thank you. Mary Foltz, our friend, she has a question for us. She says, words of wisdom to justify asking for educational testing at LSC.
At LSC, what is Mary's question? Mary is one of our very engaged community members, and I love when she joins us. She always joins us most often for Ask the Advocate. So thank you for being here tonight, Mary. And then I don't know if I heard it as a question. I thought I heard it as a comment.
So what are your words of wisdom to justify asking for educational testing? Like what tips do you have? What are your words of wisdom?
I think, let me see if this is what Mary is implying, and she can correct me if I'm not addressing her question. But oftentimes, it's unfortunate. I will see students who have disabilities placed in a more restrictive environment. And that may be because the team thinks that is the placement that they require. So parents can advocate and ask for educational psychological testing to show that, hey, my child doesn't need to be in this placement, because we can get the testing, we can look at those results, and then from those results, we can make an informed placement decision. So I'm going to use the example of maybe a student who is perceived as having an intellectual disability. I have supported students who were thought to be lower on the cognitive function scale. And then we actually got updated testing. We found out their IQ, their cognitive abilities are solidly average, but they're in a very restrictive classroom for students with more severe disabilities. And that really isn't an appropriate placement for that child. So I think what Mary is saying is you can use data and testing and evaluation results to advocate for a more appropriate placement. And that might be helpful to that parent. Thank you.
And she mentions also the local screening committee, or in Loudoun County, Virginia, they call it a child study. It's, one of these more informal plans that we talk about in this month's blog, as a matter of fact. And so I think that she's also getting at, how can we ask for educational testing when we're in this local screening committee, or we're in this child study informal plan? How can we move that to the next level and get to a more formal plan and protect our children?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just talked with a parent yesterday who, unfortunately, her child has been I use the word stuck in child study for a while, and the school district is not wanting to evaluate. I see that in multiple school districts. Often school teams feel that kind of an informal plan, they'll put some accommodations. They might even put some response to intervention services in place. They feel that is sufficient for looking at a child with suspected disabilities and then making a decision as to whether or not they should then conduct a more formal psychoeducational evaluation. But, as part of the Child Find obligation, which is part of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, school divisions are required to identify and evaluate students who are suspected of having a disability. And I always say, if a parent suspects that their child has a disability, while they might appreciate an informal plan, or they might appreciate the opportunity for their child to participate in some response to intervention activities, there's no way to know if that child has a disability or not unless you conduct an evaluation. Right. So, again, as I've said in this presentation tonight, I'm not a clinical psychologist or a neuropsych. I can recommend some great ones, but school team members aren't either unless they are the staff conducting the evaluation. So it really isn't reasonable for the teachers or the staff that are putting in informal services and accommodations in place. They don't meet the criteria to determine if that child has a disability. They have to be evaluated to then go to an eligibility meeting, to then have the discussion, does this child meet the criteria to be identified in school as a student with disability, and therefore requires a plan that is, individualized and appropriate based upon their unique needs.
Wow. So if your child is stuck in that child study or LSC, we're just encouraging you to proceed with getting that evaluation for sure.
And I would request it. I would request it in writing. I would request it verbally at the meetings. I would ask the school district to explain the rationale that they are using to deny the parent's request for an evaluation. And then, of course, as we've highlighted multiple times, and we want parents to know that prior written notice is one of their procedural safeguards. So you can ask when there's disagreement that any disagreement be recorded in the prior written notice that the school district is required to send to you. And that's a great place to capture the parent has requested and an educational, a full comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation. The school district has determined that they're not going to perform one at this time, and then give the rationale, give the data as to why the school division has made that decision. And then the parent, very well will need that in terms of any future advocacy steps.
Great. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us tonight. At the bottom of our screen, you can see our website going by there. Go ahead. I just saw a question come in, so I'm going to stop what I'm saying. One more question. It says no PWN for 504, though, right? We've just IEP. Can you get a prior written notice for a 504?
No, 504 is under a different, that falls under the Office of Civil Rights. 504 is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So school districts do not provide prior written notice for 504s.
Okay, just want to clarify that. Great. So as I was saying, guys, thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you for your questions. If you have more questions, if you want to see more about our blogs or past Ask the Advocate Live series, you can go onto our website. We have a tab right there that says Ask the Advocate. If you'd like to talk to Lorraine some more, go ahead and book your discovery call. That's right on our website as well. And as Lorraine was saying, she's happy to speak with you individually and give you some more targeted recommendations and see how she may be able to help your family.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone virtually. We wish you a happy holiday season. We hope everybody stays safe, and we look forward to seeing everyone in the new year.
That's right. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.